Assalamualaikum, I am Taka Cahya Berliana from Group 7. In this video, my group will present a material about limits to events. What is limits to events? Limits to events is about how aspectual properties and adverbial phrases can add limits to events. Aspectual properties in this question is a form of aspect of the verb which is divided into progressive and perfect. Adverbial phrases are adverb phrases that give information like when, where, why, and how in sentences. So, the subject in this topic is about how they can put into limits to events. A state is a condition or a changeless event without inherent end, like to be tall or to resemble. It refers to someone, but not only someone. Even so, a state hasn't always been continued. It's continuing when we consider it with no apparent change. A state doesn't have a point termination. It doesn't progress towards a time of being finished. That's why the progressive cannot be used easily with the states. Part of its meaning is that the time of reference R is before the finish F. That the event is not finished at R. For example, he is being tall. She is very intelligent. Most adjectives and nouns are essentially stative in this sense, for it takes no effort to continue being what one is. However, adjectives are necessarily stative. To be polite or silly can be so contrary to one's nature that it takes a force of will to continue being so. If so, we can use the progressive to bring out their temporariness. As in the following, like he is being silly, she was being extra stupid yesterday. Progressive is not only way to limit a state. A time adverb will do just as well. Thus, the last example is effective as the first one for saying that it's a temporary state. The progressive put limits in time on adverbs also, like he is singing, speaks of a period of singing already begun, yet to be complete. Verbs usually describe process with ends that follow their beginnings as surely as they follow night. Volition is related to non-stative, for not only does the progressive add it sometimes. States are inherently involutionarily are a process we cannot control, including many body functions and most of the process of nature like growing, dying, or being born. A standard way to test whether or not a verb is volitional is whether or not it can be commanded. One cannot choose whether or not to die, for example, so it is generally very strange to command someone to do it. However, it is possible to try to command just about any process, especially if emotionally involved. For example, a farmer in a dry spell might say, "Rain, damn it."
Right, so I'm Rizky and I'm going to explain about the next material. The first one is volition. So the volition is actually not an aspect because it is not referring to both beginning or finish, but it is actually related to non-stative. in other hands, aspect is actually something that is understood as, like something that is inherently and involuntary. So in other words, we could say that it's something that we cannot control, which process that we cannot control. For example, like the activities or the process of being born, growing, or dying. You could see that it's a natural process that we cannot control. For another specific example is one's cannot decide whether to die or not. So it'll be very weird for you to tell or to command them to die or to do it. But it is actually possible to command the like command any process, which especially when the emotional is involved, like when you're trying to fight with someone and then you're trying to say, oh, you better die or something. So it will be very fine in context. Another example is that the verb is actually understood as something that is non-volitional in natural context, but um, when you try to add adverb as the components of volition to it, you could see that the non-volitional will no longer there. For example, like when you're saying breathing is actually something non-voluntary. It is something that happens naturally. But when you add, like he is breathe, he is breathing, is actually normal. Is actually non-volitional. But when you try to say like he is breathing slowly, there is an adverb in the sentence, then uh, it will make the sentence become volitional. That's it. The next one is punctive and durative, or perfective and imperfective. So punctive is actually when the end must follow the heels of the beginning. For example, like to notice or to recognize. While durative is actually when the end is longer after the beginning. For example, like to explode or to last. Um, Another way to call this term are perfective and imperfective. In some language, like for example in Slavic language, the perfective or the punctive actually formed by the imperfective or the durative. For a specific example, such as to say right or possession means right, is actually imperfective, and to form it to perfective or to punctive, you could say uh, napashach, which mean to write. So yeah, that's how it works. The last one is iterative and generic. The moment when you're trying to use progressive and punctive at the same time, the times will automatically slow down. We call these situations as expanded tense. For example, like when you're saying, I was jumping over the fence when the shot rang out, you could see that the moment when I jump is actually at the same time as uh, the shot rang out. So it's very short time, but happens at the same times. You could see that instead of stretching the times, the sentence tends to, could be interpreted as iterative because there is actually a repetitions. Both moment happens at the same times, and that's how the iterative works. So how about the generic? You know that in English, when you are using that language, the verb has to been through several transformations of forms into, like past or progressive or future or something like that. But how if the verbs is not been through any transformations? Then the context of the sentence will don't have specific times. For example, like when you're saying he studies mathematics, all you know is he studies mathematics, but you will not know uh, what times that the sentence referring to, and that's how the generic terms coming from. That's it. I think that's enough for me, and I give the authorities to the next presenter. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Puri Pispitasari and I'm going to explain about types of verbs. The first one is accomplishment verbs. It expresses an activity or an event that includes the end point, so they cannot be used with the past tense unless the activity or the event was already accomplished. And the second types is the progressive verbs. It is located at the end or the finish of the event, depicted after the time of references. So it basically express the lack of completion of the event, even if there's an indication of completion, such as up. For example, sentence: he was drinking up her beer when she came back from the loop. It means that he intended to drink all the beer, but he had not when she returned. He had not drink it. And the last is the achievement verbs. It focuses almost entirely on completion of some activities, because this kind of verbs express something that happened at a moment in time, forcing a completive interpretation despite of indefinite object. Next material is adverbs of limit. So there is adverbs of duration, which is represented as L. It means that it is a length of time. It is a duration. This is what we call adverb of duration. It makes a limit at even, the end of even, F finish, equals begin plus length of time. So for example, swimming across the river cannot go on forever, because adverbs in the sentence itself set up the goals that the action is finished when someone reaches the other side of the river. However, we cannot say I swam across the river for 30 minutes, because there are two goals in the same sentence. The other side is the river, and the second is the 30 minutes. One of them is sure to be satisfied before the other, unless of course the river is narrow. It's a narrow river, so it's possible for you to repeat it again. Okay, the last material is aspect of even. As a language, for example in English and Japanese, it can be significantly different in how they manage their language, their aspect language. Fortunately, there are only two elements to highlight in this section. The first one is the beginning, and the last is the end of the event or the finish. The finish is the point which an event is complete and finished, and it cannot be continued further. In even, there are four aspects. The first one is punctual. It means that the end is happen soon after the beginning. And the second is durative. Durative means that the end of the event is happen long after the beginning. And the third is completive. Completive means that it has ending, it has the end, and it's finished. And the last is iterative. It is for the end and the beginning is for series. It means that it is repetition.